Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to catch up with some of the Brexit discussions that took place at the Labour conference last week. Not in the main hall, of course, but at the fringe events. Essentially, do we have a clearer idea of what Labour will do to reverse the extreme Tory Brexit, as I might describe it anyway, or strengthen the very weak Tory Brexit deal as Labour would express it? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, despite the moratorium on discussing Brexit too freely in the main hall, where there were lots of cameras, I have to say there were actually some positive things to come out of the Labour conference regarding Brexit. Now, before I go over what was said, it's worth bearing in mind, repeating that actual trade experts do keep telling us there's lots that Labour can do within their stated red lines. Yes, it's unfortunate that they keep saying no to EU membership, no to the single market, and especially no to the customs union, and that this is, expressed as a permanent thing. But in reality, remember, whatever is promised in a manifesto is for one parliament. And also in reality, we can't join the EU without Conservative support anyway. So why have a policy on something you can't achieve unilaterally? There's no established way to join the single market alone, but there might be in the following parliament. So, okay. The customs union is the one that bothers me. But anyway, people behave as if we can only tinker here and there unless we make one of the three big steps. But that is not actually the case. It would be better for us if we could. It would be better us if we could just join the EU tomorrow. But that is not to say that there aren't big improvements to be made without it. And I cannot emphasise enough the fact that the Tories gave us a Brexit that was only marginally better than no deal. So many people don't really understand this, but as damaging as the extreme Tory Brexit was, it gives Labour room to make big improvements without poking at the big three hot button issues in public. And one thing that I've talked about, I've done a few videos on this year, is the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention. Now, this is an example of something we can join that would be huge to quite a lot of our exporters, because what it would mean is we can import products from any of these countries, use them in our own production, and they count as having come from the UK for rules of origin purposes. It includes not just EU countries, which we've sort of got agreement with anyway, but other non-EU European countries, as well as countries in North Africa and the Middle East. And when I was at a fringe with Labour MP Stella Creasy, who's chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, she mentioned this scheme. It was actually quite funny when she did it. I almost laughed because when she mentioned it, it was like she was... She gave the impression that she thought nobody in the room would have heard of it. It was almost like a sort of, oh, get ready for this thing you've never heard of. And I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I think quite a lot of people in this room know exactly what that is. But she talked about it with such enthusiasm that I took it as a sign she knows the Labour government are going to go for it right away. Otherwise, why mention that scheme? Like, there's loads of schemes that the UK can join. Why mention that one in particular and so loudly and so enthusiastically? I think because from day one, Labour are going to be working on that. She also made another interesting point. She said that if you're talking about joining the EU or even just the single market, you're talking about a decade of negotiations, even if we get political support in the UK for it. But that doesn't help a business who needs improvements in 18 months or they're finished. Another clear statement that Labour recognised that they need to substantially improve the trading environment for British-based businesses in very short order if they're to deliver the economic growth that we're going to need for the following election. And that touches on a point that I've made a lot. When people are looking, understandably critically, at Labour, who won't openly discuss the Brexit elephant in the room, consider that the Tories get away with economic malaise. The media will do their best to distract the public from Tory incompetence and greed. They'll say, oh, it's the fault of this thing or that thing. Or actually, it's not that bad after all. It's actually doing really well. They're not going to do that for Labour. Labour are like a woman in a senior management position. They've got to do way better than their colleagues in order to satisfy people that they're even doing as well. Labour cannot just point to a graph and go, look, we're doing quite well. They have to deliver in a way that people can feel in their everyday lives. Labour have to deliver meaningful economic growth. Meaningful means people can feel it. They can't do that by tinkering. If Labour do not tear down lots of Tory trade barriers and quickly, they will be risking the following election. And the benefit of listening to people like Stella Creasy is that as a backbencher, she can speak a little bit more freely about matters. She's a Labour MP, Labour MP have their positions. She's not going to say anything that harms the party's electoral chances, but she can be a bit more frank in her explanations than a shadow minister would. But she will also be in regular conversation with policy setters in the party because they're her colleagues. When she says Pan-European Mediterranean Convention with a flourish, it's because she knows it's going to happen. There'll be other schemes as well. If I have to pour cold water on anything, it is that Labour's plan is to build up lots of individual bilateral agreements with the EU to take out the extreme Tory Brexit, one trade barrier at a time, because that's easy. There's no political angst in this country about that. It's an agreement with the EU. Like the Tories have done that. Rishi Sunak wins a framework, the Horizon deal now. These are just individual agreements. Labour can carry on negotiating individual agreements. We know that there's no big political headache with doing so. So as a way of reversing Brexit, bit by bit, without spooking the horses with incredibly noisy talk of single market customs union and so on, then the way Labour are proceeding definitely works. Absolutely right to proceed in terms of UK politics. The problem is that the UK is not exactly trusted in the EU. Yes, Labour may convince them that they're different, but then what if the Tories come back to power in a few years' time? So our negotiations may be slower than Labour are hoping for because of a couple of things. First, the EU will want more safeguards from us because we're a bad faith actor at the moment than they would ordinarily. With a lot of agreements, there can be a little bit of trust in it with other countries. Well, that trust's not there for us, so there's going to need to be more safeguards. That could mean taking longer to negotiate these agreements. The second thing is these issues are way higher priority for the UK than they are for the EU. Right? I completely believe David Lammy when he says EU relationships will be his top priority. I completely believe that Labour will be pushing for lots of talk on lots of agreements to boost trade because they need it. It's not just I believe I'm going on blind faith. They need it and they know they need it. But we can't expect the EU to be just as keen. They will be keen, because on the other extreme, I get comments on the channel from people saying, oh, the EU won't negotiate anything. They're perfectly happy with things the way they are. The UK isn't a major issue for the EU at all. This is nonsense on the other extreme. Of course, the UK, the second largest economy and the joint largest military power in Europe, is a major issue for the EU when Europe is at war and they need to find a way to compete with China and the United States in the new industrial revolution that's just kicked off. In fact, the BBC and Guardian are reporting this weekend that German Finance Minister Christian Lindner has spoken encouragingly about the UK getting closer trade relationships with the EU. Although I will say, bear in mind that when we were in the EU, Germany was one of our very closest allies. So not surprising that they would be the most explicit in encouraging us there. That being said, I gather from people who are very much involved in EU affairs, rather than just shouting from the outside, there are lots of other EU members who are keen as well. But we must still remember the EU has other major problems to deal with. Brexit is a way bigger problem for us than it is for them. Time will tell. But there is a reasonable fear that although Labour have got the right ideas, they may not get what they want as quickly as they want it. That is the big unknown. The unknown is not whether Labour wants to dismantle our Brexit trade barriers. They do. It's whether they have a firm grounding in what will be possible and in what time frame. Keir Starmer has said he wants to bomb-proof all his manifesto promises. What he said he means by that is to make sure that they have airtight plans to deliver on all of them, to make sure that they're not just announcing things because it sounds like the right policy, but they don't really have a plan behind it. He wants to make sure that everything in the manifesto has a plan that will definitely work, so at the next election, no one can say you didn't deliver on that. Now, we know that senior Labour figures have been meeting with EU officials and others in Brussels. Obviously, nothing can be promised or agreed at those meetings. But as a way of testing the waters, what is feasible, it at least gives me hope that Labour are being realistic They're certainly going to some efforts to make sure that they're being realistic, although that is a hope rather than expectation. And politics is sort of on a timer here. Labour need to make sure that the results are there to see and feel before they go to the polls for re-election. There can't be any of this, oh, you'll see their benefits in 10 years' time. Tories can get away with that sometimes. Labour will never get away with that. Also, it's not binary. It's not a case of whether they do enough to win or lose the following election, 2028, 2029, whenever it is. It's by how much. Because if Labour win re-election with a majority of just like 20 or fewer, they're going to struggle to do much in their second term. If they win re-election with a majority of, say, 60 or more, well, then they should be fine. But again, Labour will know that. Cannot say it enough. Labour know they have to deliver, and they know that Brexit is a barrier to that, and they know specifically why Brexit is a barrier to that. Despite their reluctance to talk frankly about it in public, they know that. The conversations at the conference, in fringe events, away from the public glare, was much more open. The same people leading the party now are the same people who had no problems being frank about the Brexit issues before 2020. It's the same people. It's just not the same political situation. But on balance, I would say I am more confident about Labour's position since listening to these fringe event talks. I'll confess, my heart did sink a little bit when I asked a question. And Stella Creasy said, hopefully on behalf of Labour Movement for Europe, that, you know, oh yeah, we use reputable posters. We use Delta Poll. And I thought, what? What? Oh dear. But that hopefully she was talking about specifically Labour Movement for Europe there, not the Labour leadership. Hopefully they use an actual genuine pollster for their research. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.